So one of the most challenging things we face as creatives is how to actually address a creative brief. When you're given an assignment to create something out of nothing, how do you make that happen in a way that is going to satisfy your client's needs? Because so often those needs are sort of fuzzy, right? Like you're taking words and ideas and things that they've thought of in an idea or a vision that they may only have in their mind, and you're trying to turn it into something that's more tangible, like a piece of music or a video or some other form of media. So how do you do that when it's locked up inside the client's head? You're basically playing a guessing game. There's this amazing video, I'm sure you've seen it. It's of a red fox hunting mice in the wintertime. I think it's from a Discovery Channel thing. I've linked it below if you want to check it out. It's really great. So this fox is running around in the middle of winter in, I'd say, about 3 or 4 feet of snow. And he's hunting mice that are actually underneath the snow, right at the grass. And he's got his ears, right, those big fox ears. And then all of a sudden he sort of stops. And he does this. And then all of a sudden he jumps and goes nose first into the snow up to his butt. It's really great. And then you just see his tail and his hind legs sticking up. And that's his hunting method. But there's something really interesting in that way of operating that I think we can apply in our creative work. And that is an idea of triangulation, which is using a set of data points in order to find out where something is. If you're in the middle of an ocean on a boat, you need 3 points in order to triangulate. That's like 1 point here, 1 point there, and then 1 point up here. Then you know where you are in relation to those fixed positions. Well, the interesting thing about the fox is, apparently his success rate is not that great unless he's facing directly towards magnetic north. So there's 1 point, the ear, the other ear, which gives you that stereo vision. So he's doing this tilt, like where's the mouse, where's the mouse? But once he's locked onto magnetic north, he's actually using that as his third data point. His success rate goes up to 75%. And I think if we apply the same kind of operating procedure to our own work, I think we can see our success rate jump really up quite a bit. So how does this look in actual practice? Well, I'll give you an example from my own work. So recently I was asked to create the theme, the musical theme for a podcast that was meant to promote winter activities in a city. And what they wanted was something that would feel like winter, get people excited about winter and winter activities, but it couldn't sound like Christmas. So imagine that. You're tasked with creating music that sounds like winter, but can't have any of the hallmarks of Christmas music. So there were no sleigh bells, no children singing, there was no carols. Part of the conversation was around using the sounds of winter activities. So like sleds, skates on ice, skis on snow. And that was somewhat helpful, but it still didn't tell me what the music was supposed to sound like. So I had 1 point of good data. We want something that sounds like winter, but doesn't sound like Christmas. Okay, so that's my first data point. And the other data point that I had was they pointed to another podcast theme that they really liked, which had a very kind of spare piano-only opening. So I wrote a couple of themes for the client. What I focused on was sort of this icy feeling. There was sort of an icy sound in it, but then the music was sort of warm. So it was this contrast between those two things, which to me feels like winter. It's being outdoors and getting a nice blast of crisp, fresh air in the face, and maybe doing a winter activity and then coming back into a warm place and having a nice cup of hot cocoa. One of the things I got back was, it sounds too corporate. And that was an interesting response. I was actually very surprised by that. Because to me, corporate is like very slick, kind of soulless, saccharine, really over the top happy, and sort of has this feeling of like, uplift without really any substance. And I didn't feel like my tracks had that. So obviously I was missing some point of data. So we started to dig down on this a little bit. And after a lot of emails and a phone call, we managed to get to a point where I think I was starting to uncover that third data point. The client said, I feel like this other piece that he pointed to, which was the theme from that other podcast that they'd mentioned, subverts the viewers or the audience's expectations. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean, to subvert the expectation? So I really listened to it, and what I found was there was a chord progression in it that was surprising, very lightly surprising. I think that was sort of the thing that made it feel mysterious or made you tilt your head a little bit and go, that's interesting. And what I realized was that my piece was fine from the perspective of what it was doing, but it had no tension in it. It was all easygoing and fun-loving and wonderful, and everything sort of went and resolved itself very nicely without any tension, without any feeling like, what happens next? And I think that's what was the trigger for the client. They were saying, look, this is something where we want people to lean into it. And without a feeling of tension, without that feeling of like, I wonder what happens next, you just feel like everything is resolved and fine, and there's no real, impetus to continue listening and to find out what happens next. So if I had gone back and used his idea of what is corporate, or just if I just listened to what he said and said, it sounds corporate to me, then I'd say, well, what's the opposite of corporate to me? And that's not a good enough data point, because I would have thought, well, it's got to be more edgy, it's got to sound more distorted, it's got to sound more independent and indie rock maybe, so I would put guitars on it and done all this other stuff and really gotten away from what I think was already working in the track. So with that extra bit of data, I had 3 points of data finally, and I knew what to do. All I had to do was change some of the chord progression in order to create a bit of tension and subvert the audience's expectation of where we were going. And then it felt like you had this moment where I was like, I wonder what happens next. And then the client was happy. We had our piece that felt and sounded like winter, had both the warmth and the cold aspect, so we did end up putting those sound design elements in it. So we had the snow and everything else, which helped my icy textures bring out that wintry thing. We had the warmth of going back inside and this overall positive feeling, but we also had this little moment, and that was our third point of triangulation that just nailed it, where we knew we wanted to subvert the audience's expectations a little bit, set up a bit of tension, so the audience would lean in and go, I wonder what happens next, and want to continue listening to the podcast. So of course, more data points than 3 are always best. If you can get a bunch of data points, then you're getting closer and closer, a cluster of data that will really pinpoint you to that center point that says all of these things combined, or all of these things minus these things. So it could be this plus this minus that, because it's so easy for us to assume that we know what someone is talking about. When they say something like, it sounds corporate, immediately we have a list of things in our head that we think that means. But I think that example that I gave is actually really interesting, because it shows you how different that can actually be. So the cool thing about this technique is you can actually use it as well to come up with ideas or concepts that are going to be original. When I say original, I mean something that is not only kind of surprising and different than something that came before, but also something that is approachable, right? So when we talk about originality, we could be talking about something that is so ahead of its time that people don't know what to do with it, and they may even reject it. And I think for a lot of us who are working as, freelance professionals who are client-based, like composers for screen, you don't necessarily want to scare your client off with something that's so original and so out of the box that they don't know what to do with it. What we want is something that they understand and invites them into what the story that we're trying to tell, but then gives it a little bit of a twist. So again, you take 3 points of data. And in this case, what you're doing is you're doing 2 obvious things plus 1 non-obvious or novel thing. Right? So something that doesn't really belong. 2 things that totally belong and are obvious, and 1 thing that doesn't belong, non-obvious, a novel idea that you get injected. And you combine those things together, and then you end up in a place typically that is, to a certain extent, comfortable. Like, people understand it, they understand what it's about, they understand what they're about to get into, but then there's a little bit of a subverting twist, right? So let me give you some examples of that. Chris Nolan, one of his first feature films that he did that he really got known for was Memento. And Memento is interesting if you look at it from that perspective, right? So what is Memento? Memento is first and foremost a detective story. So that's obvious. Everyone knows what a detective story is about. And we have a protagonist who needs to solve the murder of his wife. So there's 2 very obvious things. A detective who needs to solve a murder. 2 obvious things that you understand very basically from every movie in that genre. The subverting twist is the detective has a form of amnesia where he forgets everything at the end of every day and wakes up the next morning and has to relearn and remember everything about his life, about where he's been, and everything that he is on this quest to do. Inception's sort of similar, basically a heist movie, right? And you have your plucky band of thieves who are looking to remove an object of value, right? So 2 obvious things. This movie's going to be a heist movie, right? And you have your band of plucky thieves who need to get a valuable item. 2 obvious things, non-obvious. Most of the action is going to take place in dreams. and the valuable object is information. District 9 is a great movie and another good example of this, where you have a film that's essentially about class and race and xenophobia. And so naturally, then the second obvious thing would be to set it in a place where those things have been very prevalent, South Africa. So you have your two obvious things there. You have a movie about xenophobia and race, and you're setting it in South Africa. The third thing, there are going to be illegal aliens in this movie, but these are actual aliens from outer space. And there's your twist. There's a non-obvious, novel thing. All right, so I hope this whole concept of triangulating and using three great data points, this plus that, or this plus this minus that, or two obvious things plus one novel thing, is interesting, and you figure out a way to use it in your work. I think especially when you're talking about solving creative briefs or even solving client feedback where they've given you something that they want changed. So you're not throwing the entire thing out, you're just adapting or changing or molding it slightly based on this kind of discovery where you ask questions, ask really great questions, and try to get to those great 3 points of data or more if you can to really help nail down that beautiful center point and get to the nugget of that thing that everyone's really after. And if you're trying to be creative and come up with original ideas that people are going to be welcome into and really engaged with, then using that 3 data point set again, where you're doing 2 obvious things and 1 non-obvious novel thing, is going to really help you get to that point. So hit me in the comment section and let me know if this is something you've employed, or let me know if this is interesting to you and how you think you might use it in the future. Give me a like on this video if you like it. Hope you subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.